It's a pleasure to be here and meet all of you guys. Obviously happy to chat after. The topic is a little bit like unconventional. It's kind of like the idea of like, we're all in the same war fighting to get capital and adoption for crypto. And I think right now a lot of people are obviously talking about fundraising, both from a fund perspective as well as from a portfolio company or from a project perspective. And quickly to us, we are basically a venture capital fund in the space, blockchain founders fund. We've been around since 2018 as sort of an investment firm. We invest between $200K to $5 million in projects, backed, I think, something around 180 companies in the space, and actively deploying. So if anyone looking to raise capital, obviously happy to have a chat. And I think there's obviously a lot of challenges. I'm not going to go through the whole presentation in sort of every detail. I'm happy to send it to you guys if you're interested after. But for me, it's more about sort of getting the gist of fundraising and kind of like what to look out, what not to look out, how to approach founders, what are different opportunities there in the space right now. So, of course, there are a lot of opportunities and challenges in the space. I think one piece where a lot of people struggling around, and also what gets more and more in the heads of VCs, is understanding the legal frameworks of things. That some companies are simply uninvestable if they're in a certain jurisdictions. Or, some jurisdictions get more and more popular, some of them are not popular anymore. So especially if you're a regulated fund, it's getting a lot more difficult to invest in jurisdictions where it's a challenge. Like anywhere in Europe, we just did an acquisition in Europe, and I just don't recommend incorporating in Europe, for example. It's just a legal and red tape nightmare. But Singapore, for example, is a great place to incorporate, same as I think some other places like Panama is getting really exciting. You have, depending if you raise on equity and you raise on tokens, I think the journey looks very, very different. Right now, I think a lot of VCs can sort of, vote for this as well. Tokens are exciting. A lot of people want to get exposure to token investments. That's why a lot of companies start raising on Safe plus token warrants. And I think also that gives you access, right? That gives you access to get a lot more liquidity because it gives you access to different opportunities of fundraising, not just the traditional VC route, but also initial coin offerings on DEXs, on centralized exchanges, to also give the community a piece to invest in it, and so on and so forth. And it obviously leads to quicker fundraising process as well sometimes. I think one piece which is like I cannot highlight enough for any project is really the market analysis, like understanding where you play. And especially as we see a lot of companies, and I think Ripple and many of you guys as well, very few of them actually understand their customers. And that's why it's hard to make an investment, because a lot of projects are simply just like copy-paste solutions, putting an AI layer on top of it to make it more exciting. But if you sort of go deeper, it gets more and more difficult to understand where you actually play and how do you fit in that competitive landscape. And we, of course, do our own competitive landscape analysis as well. I think every VC does. And I think it's important to really get a deep understanding of where you play and how to quickly differentiate, because that's, I think, the most effective way of positioning yourself in the VC landscape as well. Market analysis, a bunch of examples here. Of course, you can look at all these things from a more like crypto-related piece, but also, look at GitHub. Also investors I approach, look at GitHub if you're more technical, understand how is the technical solution actually different. Look at certain metrics, understand how it looks from a lot of layer ones are getting more popular right now, so how are they actually differentiating themselves? Is it on transaction speed? Is it from a gas fee perspective? Is there a whole new consensus mechanism? Like really understand where you play in that market. Like I said, I'm not going to go through all of them, but I think that's sort of one of the most important things I've seen, which helps on basically two things. Number one, working with someone else is always better than working alone. But especially in Web3, everything is very community driven. So a lot of companies which have successfully raised have either partnered with strategic partners. We also do this as a fund. For us, basically, we invest in other funds to enhance our deal flows. Other startups, they invest in other companies as well to basically build out their portfolio. Or you just build literally strategic partnerships, which helps you also just to get the brand recognition, right? If you're able to have partners with Web2 players, for example, that gives a lot of trust to your investors, and it also helps like scale your fundraising round. And just a quick loop here. I think it's also extremely important if you look at customer acquisition. I don't know how you guys sort of realize that, but customer acquisition costs in Web3 are extremely expensive because everybody's fighting for the small same user base. So you have two options. Either you're basically, educating people to come in Web3 and they be your customers, or you have to take customers from someone else if you're in that same industry and unless you're like completely pivoting, doing something else. So working with partners is something we highly recommend. And I think it also helps you to really define your product and understand where do you fit in that landscape. A couple of examples here you probably all know, but I think they really crushed it of getting sort of into these more Web2 branded names. And then timing. Timing is something quite interesting. And I think a big problem no one's really talking about is that a lot of companies, they raised on a token 1 or 2 years ago and still actually launched a token. So like a lot of venture capital funds sitting on their signed SAFTs, but we don't have anything that actually works. And everybody's kind of, at least now it's getting better, but pushed their TGE further away. So when is the perfect timing to launch your token or to go fundraising? I don't think there is a perfect timing. And I think we have to go away from that whole timing capacity, whole timing idea. I think the main thing is really just like fundraising literally never stops if you're a founder. I think that's kind of like the key message. Even if you're not fundraising or if you think you have enough money in my bank account, like talk to investors, right? Like send investor updates, take these conversations, attend these conferences, and figure out, because it's always so much easier if you have warm leads if you're trying to raise than if you just do it completely cold after you paused all the communication with them for 6 months or a year. And I also feel like what is a general big misconception is like, don't start fundraising if you're 6 months or 8 months down in runway, because it's just gonna get so much more difficult because you don't have the leverage anymore. You literally don't, because, I'm not saying we do this, but a lot of funds do this. They basically just start to wait, because if I get you down to 4 or 3 months runway, then I can set better terms. Or even like, a down round will happen or other things we basically want to avoid. But if you have 18 months, 24 months of runway, raise the cap if you can, if you have shown traction, and start fundraising again, or take some checks in, especially if you raise on safes or SAFTs and you don't have price rounds yet. I don't think it's like a big issue of just like let the capital come in, obviously factor in dilution of how much you want to give away on both token or equity. But it's really the timing. The timing is every day, everywhere. And especially now in this market, we see so much more capital being deployed. So many funds are eager to invest. Now it's a great time to get going. And also ETH Denver and in all these conferences to really get connections. And when you approach these investors, don't just throw your product in their face, right? I think it's always about relationship. It's like, I want to get to know you, you want to get to know us, because that's the whole point, right? We're not investing in a product, at least at early stages. We typically invest in the founders and their ability to pivot, be agile, but also be just a nice partner. We think, okay, this person can really scale, can get people excited to join their business from an HR perspective, but also to get customers on board. So I think right now is a really, really great time to go through all these different stages. And like I said quickly, obviously, the traditional VC route is great, and it gives you good names and it gives you reputation in the space. But also it's great to sometimes raise with your community, right? Especially if you're a B2C player, you end up having a token. I think it's very interesting to understand launch pads, ICOs, or like other things where you can not just raise money from a couple of players, but you raise money from the community. And I think a lot of people do that. Obviously, everybody's thinking about going on a centralized exchange first, for example, or a DEX, and sort of get the community involved. But there's many, many different options. How much time do I have left, by the way? 5 minutes. Okay, I have to speed up a little bit. But there's different options, and I think it's getting quite interesting, especially as the market also gets more and more exciting and hot. A lot of people are going to be excited to join these ICOs, or if you go on a DEX or a SEX or any sort of launch pad or launch pool. But I think here a very important piece is that you localize them. I don't know exactly, obviously, where you guys' users are from, but if you sort of, for example, focus more on Asia, use a more Asian-focused ecosystem, right? Because that's where you're going to get the exposure you want, and sometimes they can even localize it in your local language or put some marketing campaigns to it. The same is true for like any KOLs and influencers you try to tackle. I'm not a massive fan of KOLs and influencers. I mean, I like them, they have their point, but a lot of them are not necessarily giving valuable users, unfortunately. They're all looking for alpha hunters and airdrop people, which is great from like a up and down perspective, but if you want to grow it consistently, I think there's sometimes also better ways of doing it. At least it cannot be a whole marketing plan, it cannot be a whole fundraising plan of going through these, influence. I think it should be a part of it, but I think you have to be careful because also you've seen a lot of them, like obviously selling a token faster than they maybe should. And messaging and branding, I think what is sort of my last point quickly I want to touch on fundraising. The founders of any business, they have to be some sort of thought leader, right? And I think a lot of companies who've been able to raise very fast, they're out there, they were known, they had a certain public profile around what they were doing, and they consistently put out content. And I'm not saying in a trashy way, but it's like whatever you want to share, whatever exciting stuff you're building on, I don't think you need to be afraid that someone takes your idea and leaves it, because at the end of the day, it's always the execution. But it's about sharing the idea with your peers, people in your network, that people are going to get to know you, which also shapes the brand of your business. Because in the beginning, it's extremely difficult to build a brand for a company because people are always going to be more excited to relate with a person and not with a company. So especially at early stages, the founder needs to stand out, right? And if you're able to build a personal brand and a personal messaging for whatever you want to achieve for your company, it's going to help you fundraising, because that's the way we're going to see, wow, this person is public, very well connected. That gives, even if it's subconscious, but like it gives you a very pleasant sort of feeling towards that business. And then if that checks out, of course, with the underlying DD, I think you have a pretty good chance of raising very interesting capital. There's a lot of different things which can either go through community, which can go through more press and PR, thought leadership, branding elements, of course. But the whole thing, the message I want to go through here is basically, don't look at fundraising as an isolated piece of what you're doing, right? It's not like, oh, I'm doing everything else and now I'm doing 2 hours of fundraising. For me, fundraising is, and we did the same thing when we raised our fund, it was like, everything else has to move in order to enable fundraising, right? So if you do your marketing, your branding, your content well, if you are able to build and differentiate your business, fundraising will naturally pick up, right? And you shouldn't be in a spot where like, okay, now I have to fundraise and now I'm going to shoot 500 messages on LinkedIn or 600 cold emails to all these investors in the PitchBook database. It's like you should naturally build up a funnel of people who are interested in what you're doing and funds who have a thesis for what you're doing, and then you would naturally approach them. They were probably already seen because you put them on investor updates, you connected with them on socials, you shared your thought leadership piece, and then the whole messaging, branding, business and fundraising comes into play and becomes a smooth process. I know it's easier said than done, but I think if you think it more of a collective process, I think it adds a lot more value how you end up raising capital from investors or the community in itself. Risk management, I think, is important. I mean, there's no game without risk, we know that. But I think if you're able to provide a clear due diligence for your investors by providing a proper data room, proper legal documentation, be advised of where you incorporate, you can already manage a lot of risk on your side, also on the investor side. There will never be no risk. We don't expect it. I mean, it's called venture capital for a reason. But I think, be mindful, be also there, and look at due diligence as a positive process for your business, because it helps you identifying weak points if it's done correct on the investor side. So don't just like, oh, it's annoying, I have to send this document now, I provide this information. You should already have that, or it shouldn't be that big of a hustle to get it, because you know your business inside out. Not going to go through all these points, we don't have time, but basically sums up what I said. Be agile, be innovative. Web3 is changing so damn fast. So we all should be changing fast and trying to adopt with new trends, new communities, new ideas. And that is really the main thing I want to say. So summarizing, look at it as a unified process, start early on, fundraising never stops, and just really build your own brand and own thought leadership that you attract the capital and the people you want to deal with. And then I think you will have a pretty good time raising. I hope to see you guys around, and thank you so much for listening.